all should fall.
Or concerns you may have as citizens of our beloved city of our parish. I'm going to set some parameters. This is not to discuss fees or consultant contracts, nor is it to get into personalities. We're here to answer any questions relative to this agreement that's being considered between the city of Alexandria and Cleco. That being said, we're going to start off with prayer. I ask that, let's see, doing like you got Joe Green. You got Joe Green walking. Reverend Dr. Joe Green, would you take the mic? Pastor of St. Matthew's Baptist Church.
Any particular purpose?
Silver Holt happens to be a member.
Prayer. Oh.
Prayer. Prayer for us.
Please.
You ask Mr. Silver offer the lead.
Tell God our Father, we thank you for the privilege of prayer and then allowing us this time together. It is my prayer that we come with open minds and teachable spirits, that we may recognize and realize how much refund we're due as utility payers in Alexandria. Help us to walk away from this meeting tonight informed and ready to do business in Jesus' name.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, roll call.
Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson.
Present.
Mr. Fowler.
Here.
Mr. Lorverdane.
Present.
Mr. Goins. Mr. Silver. Mr. Hobbs. Mr. Lawson.
President, we do have a quorum. At this time, I'm going to forward the city attorney. If you'd like to make any comments, I'll eliminate anything as to setting a protocol for the meeting. So we'll be here for Mr. City Attorney.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Good afternoon. I just wanted to introduce Mr. Michael Marcotte. He'll be making a presentation for the administration today. He's the Assistant Director of Utilities. He's an electrical engineer. We'd ask that you allow him to finish the presentation first. Is that correct, Mr. Lawson?
That's correct.
And then we'll take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Matt, Mr. Marquette.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Good
I'm going to ask
afternoon.
that to dim the lights too, make it a little bit easier to be seen in the room and certainly for Channel 4 viewers.
Just a quick note to apologize. A couple of slides didn't come out as well as we had hoped. We're having a little technical difficulty, but we'll still get our points across. As Mr. Lawson said, we're here to present information, hopefully answer as many relevant questions as we can in the proposed settlement between the City of Alexandria and the Cleco litigation that's been ongoing since 2005. The proposed settlement will lower electricity bills, restore a cooperative relationship with Cleco, and end the years-long litigation. Why is a cooperative relationship necessary given the seriousness of the allegations? And I think that's a fair question. You know, we propose to continue a relationship with a company who we have had a question about. Alexandria is transmission constrained. It is not economically feasible to get power into the city through a different provider. Alexandria sits in the middle, essentially, of Cleco's service territory. Transmission lines which move bulk power, that could move bulk power to us, are essentially owned by Cleco. To go to another provider would require the construction of additional transmission assets to bring that power to the city. Even if we found cheaper power through a third party, another provider essentially, those savings will more than likely be offset with the additional construction cost. The cheapest alternative to Cleco would cost the ratepayers hundreds of millions of dollars in new infrastructure and would not meaningfully decrease our dependence on natural gas. And we'll discuss later our current fuel mix, but the variability in the cost and the flux that we see in the ups and downs of our electric fuel cost is directly related to the ups and downs in the current natural gas market. So our best opportunity is to diversify our fuel mix, move more towards solid fuels, which are more stable, which are cheaper, get away from the volatile natural gas market, and that ultimately is where we can capture the most value for our ratepayers. The value in the proposed power agreement probably equals or exceeds all independent assessments of the judgment, not settlement value of the city's claims. Now, what does that mean? That means that our independent experts evaluated this agreement at an arm's length, and they tell us that this agreement presents us more value than had we chosen to try the matter before a judge and been successful on each and every charge in our complaint. The proposed settlement does not rely on Cleco's interpretation of the current agreement or market assumptions. Instead, the city hired its own independent experts, that would be R.W. Beck, to interpret its current agreement and the future of the market. Any decision should not only provide the best services at the lowest cost for the current ratepayer, it should also create future value for our children and grandchildren. Most power agreements are either short-term, 5 years or less, or long-term, multi-year. For example, the current arrangement we have with LEAP of 30-plus years. We've been able to strike a middle ground, a medium-length arrangement for a total of 13 years. So it gives us stability for a reasonable amount of time, and we can still think progressively at the same time. Our current supply diversity, we have 10 megawatts, about 6% hydroelectric. That comes from Southwest Power Administration and is generated at the Harry S. Truman Hydroelectric Station in Oklahoma. 55 megawatts of coal power, that's through our LEPA allotment of Rodemaker 2 in Boyce. The remaining requirement, which is the bulk of our requirement, is primarily natural gas power. When we remember, we talked earlier about the variability in the natural gas market prices, and those are Cleco's market purchases on behalf of the city. So that last element is what drives the fluctuations in our cost. We looked at some averages so far this year. The hydro's been $21, $22 a megawatt. The coal power has been about 67, and the gas power has been 91. Separate and apart from the allegations the city made against Cleco, the volatility of the natural gas market has driven the recent escalations in electric fuel costs. This power supply agreement provides the provision of under-market power, and I think that's important. We have the opportunity to purchase power at rates lower than what the law of supply and demand is dictating that the market can drive. We have increased fuel diversification. We get away from the majority of our power being from natural gas. We have increased rights of audit and oversight, and those are significantly increased rights. We have the right to request data monthly. We have the right to challenge. And I can tell you that Cleco has already taken the step. They provide me currently daily reports on their next day purchases on behalf of the city of what it's cost. And so they're already putting that information out there. They've already taken a step of good faith. It's like I said a minute ago, it's a medium-term power supply arrangement for 13 years. It's not short-term like some cities negotiate, nor is it a long-term arrangement, but it's a good bridge to move towards a long-term arrangement, which ultimately would capture the most value for our ratepayers. That, coupled with a rate restructure, means lower electricity bills. These are our current incremental power supply costs. This is a comparison of our existing arrangement. Our existing line was supposed to be purple. That's the top line. The proposal that we're discussing tonight is the lower line. The top line's delineated by diamonds. The lower line. And it's a comparison in time of what it would have cost versus what it will cost. The savings is that difference in between the two lines. And as you can see, as you go out in the contract, even though prices increase, the savings actually grow because, again, we're getting that benefit of under-market power. And I think that's important to remember. Market variables such as the price of natural gas will always create uncertainties about cost. However, under the proposed agreement, your monthly bills will always be lower than they would have been had we continued under the existing arrangement. Some key facts that to keep in mind: this preserves the city's status as an electric utility provider. There's no provision in this that we're getting out of the business. We're committed to being in the business. Replacement of a complex array of prior agreements with a single comprehensive power sales and purchase agreement. And that's important given some of the new regulatory requirements. We have a lot of agreements that in their current form don't necessarily lend themselves well to complying with NERC regulations. We'll correct all that in this process. Inclusion of specific provisions to eliminate the previous points of contention between the city and Cleco. That goes back to what I said earlier, the audit rights, the information rights. Every month we'll get not just a bill that says we bought so many units and it cost us so many dollars, but we'll get the backup to how they computed every number on that bill. And there will be an accounting that will, there'll be no doubt as to where it came from. So it will remove some of the ambiguity that we have now. It's a provision of stable electric energy supply for 13 years to the city with the option to extend for another 5 years. Rates for wholesale electricity is projected to create value for ratepayers in the range of $60 million. Again, that's wholesale purchases at an under-market level. And those are the projected, and we'll get in later as how R.W. Beck came up with that number. Provision of the city's wholesale rates for energy is cost-based and not subject to the fluctuations of the wholesale energy market. In other words, Cleco can only charge the city, subject to certain small adjustment factors, the cost of generating the power sold to the city. We've all heard the stories in the past, especially out on the East Coast at one point, West Coast another point, where power was selling for in excess of $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 megawatt, even though it was costing $60, $70 a megawatt to generate. We're protected from those market spikes. Potential use of the value of the purposes DG Hunter units allow them to be used as a capacity reserve even when idle, but retaining the city's right to dispatch the units in times of emergency. Cleco's agreement at the city's option to purchase capacity reserves in the amount of $29 million, which capacity reserves have no real value to the city standing idle or to any third party. And I want to take these two and talk about them together. From time to time, this administration, the prior administration, the current council, and the prior council, we've all talked about the value, that DG Hunter is a value, but it's always been a nebulous concept that was hard to capture. This contract captures it, and we find out that for us right now, that plant has a value of $29 million over a 13-year period. The heat rate on it is such that it doesn't make sense except as a peaking unit that you could sell power on the market. So it's not that we could run the units and sell power to third parties. So this actually converts to real dollars and gives it some value. And I think that's important because it's always been nebulous for us. We know it was valuable, we just didn't know how. We knew it was valuable, and we still retain that value that we saw in Hurricane Gustav, that we were able to operate the plant and to maintain service in the city when transmission assets outside the city failed. Extensive and extraordinary review, audit, and challenge rights for all charges of energy provided by Cleco and in favor of the city. Again, that goes back to our right to understand the bill. And gathering that information, understanding the bill, that is the most important step towards preventing any type of recurrence to our original charge in the litigation. The city will continue to receive from LIPA and SWAPA the city's first 65 megawatts of energy, which comes from the lower cost sources. Again, the coal, solid fuel, and the hydro. We still have that. We're just buying the amounts over and above that we need from Cleco. And this agreement, if entered into, resolves the litigation. There still will be some other issues remaining. There's the other litigation, the Armstead litigation. There are attorney fees and rebates. These issues do not affect the proposed settlement and power supply agreement. Both can and will be dealt with separately by the city.
For that.
And what that means is, if we choose not to execute this
Other parties out.
agreement, then these issues don't even need to be discussed. So it's important to make the best possible decision for our ratepayers and then move forward into the administration, the council addressing these issues. That's the administration's overview. The following slides were prepared by R.W. Beck, and I'll apologize, they are somewhat more technical. I'll try to not get bogged down in the numbers, and I apologize, I do. Engineers tend to do that. This is a Beck summary of the proposed power supply agreement. It's a summary of the existing arrangement, meaning our current contract with Cleco, which is in effect through March of 2010. This analysis and its conclusions were drawn as of March 2008. It also identifies the next steps. Where do we go from here? The current draft agreement that we've all seen that's been released in the public was dated the 24th of November, excuse me. The term, again, is 13 years, beginning no later than October 1 of 2009. But as soon as all of the ancillary agreements and condition precedent would be met, has a 5-year extension option and a 24-month termination notice requirement. It meets our supplemental needs over and above our LEPA and SWAPA power. We talked about that. The capacity charge, sometimes referred to as a demand charge, is $4.50 per kilowatt per month until Rotomaker 3 comes online. COD meaning commercial operation date. From once that commercial operation date occurs, the demand charge rises to $10.40. That's to offset the capital cost of the Rotomaker 3 unit. However, by going to the petcoke, to a solid fuel, you'll see significant fuel cost savings. So the overall, even though that charge rises, the overall cost should fall. The energy charge is based on the Cleco average system fuel cost plus $2 a megawatt, which is a management fee. We get a capacity credit for DG Hunter with an option for prepayment to the city. That's the $29 million. That's how we say we've actually assigned up sort of a cash value to the plant. DG Hunter is dispatched by Cleco. If Cleco needs it, Cleco pays the fuel cost. The city is required to maintain the plant under good utility practice, and it provides that we still can operate the plant during emergencies such as hurricane or an ice storm. Provides for Cleco non-fuel and operation and maintenance payments above 4 starts per unit and 4,000 megawatt hours a year. What that means is if Cleco calls on the units more than 4 times a year, or they generate more than 4,000 megawatt hours in a year, there are some additional monies that are paid to the city. It provides us extensive rights to review, audit, and challenge all the PSA charges. Again, I think that's probably the most important thing that we gain out of this, that we can control and understand our destiny.
On the record,
Provides strong protection to the city in the event of a Cleco default. This is not something that Cleco can arbitrarily walk away from. They're locked into this. They have to deliver. Requires confirmation of network integrated transmission service under the Cleco oath. Probably a fair question is, what is that? Network integrated transmission service, you'll hear abbreviated as NITS, is what's called firm transmission, meaning you have rights to move power from point A to point B. And the Cleco oath is open access transmission tariff. That's the agreement each utility is required to have in place. It says that it's open, that you can move across their system, but the caveat
worthwhile.
you have to pay for any infrastructure that you cause to be necessary by moving that power across your system. We looked at some
money back
some other power at one point, not a large block of power, 10 megawatts.
to say if we don't
We were told energy would require $56 million in capital investment on their system to move that 10 megawatts. We think that was over-exaggerated, and that there were some existing conditions that, if corrected, would have reduced that number significantly, probably by a factor of 10 at least. But the cost to argue that point would be extensive as well. So that just kind of puts some perspective on what that can cost you. It requires other agreements with Cleco, such as reliability, that's a NERC agreement, the interconnect agreements, requires bond council reviews, the tax issues, and a release from LEPA that our LEPA power could be assigned to Cleco. And that assignment to Cleco is so that it can become a network resource. Those are all regulatory requirements. And they don't strip the city of any rights. It's still our power. We're not giving up anything. It's just truing up this contract and this agreement with regulatory requirements. Under our existing contract, the city provides its own capacity needs, whereas under the proposed agreement, that's the $4.50 or $10.40 capacity charge. What capacity needs means you have to guarantee that you have 12% more power than you actually will need available. In our case, we've been able to claim DG Hunter to satisfy that demand. The city's load is growing to the point that where we can almost no longer do that. And so we have to go out and buy additional capacity to meet that regulatory requirement. Again, we maintain our LEPA and SWAPA purchases. The city operates and maintains DG Hunter, and it can be dispatched by either Cleco or the city. If you on those lines, you have, when I talked about the diversity of our current fuel supply, I said we had the 63% that came from Cleco's market purchases. Cleco refers to that as special energy. It's the lower of average cost of Cleco gas generation or market purchases plus a 2 megawatt management fee. The gas, that's what's been driving all of this. This agreement allows us to move away from gas. There'll still be some in the mix, but there'll also be a lot more solid fuel. Firm and non-firm point-to-point transmission is arranged by Cleco on the city's behalf. This is the March 2008 analysis that Beck prepared. It's based on fuel and electricity market price forecast published in the third quarter of 2007. There has been some significant volatility in natural gas prices and in the power markets, and this is what drove them to conduct a limited review of certain assumptions that they had operated on previously. Based on this limited review, potential changes in major assumptions include updated forecast. Obviously, natural gas prices had to be adjusted. Coal price forecasts are generally higher. A lot of that is driven by rail contracts being renegotiated, and transportation of Powder Basin coal has increased. The timing and impact of carbon legislation. The new president has talked about environmental policy and carbon legislation, so there will be some impacts from that. Additional cost of transmission from market purchases under the existing arrangement. Study period has been changed to reflect the implementation of the contract beginning in 2009 through 2021. We originally were hoping to get it done in 2008, but that obviously didn't happen. And it also adjusted the expected commercial operation date of Rotomaker 3. Again, we've talked about this. The top line represents where we would be essentially if we did nothing except operate under our current arrangement. The lower line represents where we're projected to be should we execute the proposed agreement. Our projected nominal power cost, and this is the city's gross purchases for the term. Under the existing arrangement, we think those gross purchases would be about $844 million. Under the proposed arrangement, $786 million. So potential savings right there, a fifth of $1 billion. Reducing that to net present value, assuming a 5% discount rate, so moving that back to today, all in today's dollars, the existing contract would cost about $607 million, proposed $566. So the net present value of the savings would be $41 million. A projected nominal power cost savings, average over the first 5 years, $3.5 million, or $4.10 per megawatt hour. Over the initial term, total $4.8 million a year, or $5.5 per megawatt hour. The primary risk that we still have to consider, we talked about the carbon legislation, environmental policy, purchase power prices, fuel prices, natural gas, any natural gas, coal, unit outages. I mean, Cleco may be buying power from a very inexpensive, efficient unit. That unit,
Maybe a good engineer.
you may have to bring a less efficient unit online to meet the demand, and that cost is passed on. So that's still, and then our load growth is a risk. We expect that to be under 1% a year. Huge growth. That doesn't assume hot loads that could occur if there was a large industrial account that would come online. Under the expected assumptions, the Cleco proposal was projected to be about $58 million lower than the existing arrangement. Power supply costs under the Cleco proposal were projected very less than under the existing arrangement. Again, that's because we get under market power and it's cost-based instead of strictly taking market purchases, because we're paying them an amount slightly above the cost to generate it as opposed to what the market bears. Savings on the Cleco proposal were projected to be between $27 million and $93 million at a 90% confidence interval on a nominal basis for the risk evaluated. That means that if you look at that, and there's a graph, if you looked at a graph of that, with the savings, the lowest they could be would be 27 million, highest 93 million. Right in the middle is the 58 to 60 million that we keep talking about, and the 90% confidence interval is probably one of the highest statistical certainties that you could give to it, meaning that R.W. Beck honestly believes it's going to fall out in that $60 million range. That concludes the presentation. I'll be certainly happy to field questions. Mr. Lawson, you might want to direct us to how we're going to, what the protocol will be to field questions.
Protocol would be that you approach the mic, but I have two individuals that signed up, and I'm going to recognize them personally. I certainly would like others that may be interested in speaking to sign up on, get a document off the dais and speak to what, right to what you're interested in speaking on. I have here, though, Mr. Carroll Lanier. Mayor Carroll Lanier would like to talk about the return of Cleco overcharges. This time, I'd like to recognize Mayor Carroll Lanier, very familiar with these environments.
Thank you, sir. I guess the biggest question is when the Cleco returns a rebate to the city of Alexandria, will it be returned to the customers who paid it to start with? I know my personal bill was $500 plus some months, and I know in some lower income areas where they have less insulation, so forth, they're $800 and $900. I certainly think all these people need their money back, and I'd like the council to consider that I know Brother Fowler said that he hadn't heard anybody want it back. He ain't been talking to the same people I've been talking to. He need to start listening. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mayor. And that's some of the considerations we hear for us. I really hadn't heard any councilman that said they've made up their mind. The purpose of this hearing is to do exactly what you just did, express your concern. Your concern is that the money to be being returned to the citizens.
Appreciate
The
your
ratepayer.
consideration.
Thank you. Have next Mr. Patrick LaCour. Wants to speak on information and to express concern for the best deal. Mr. LaCour.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Appreciate being allowed to come tonight. And
Yes, sir.
my first question is, we saw the bullet points and the assumptions, but that is really meaningless if we don't understand the details behind the assumptions. And I would like to be able to see the details to see what they're saying, because some of what I hear doesn't make sense to me. That if you understand how Cleco operates, Cleco is a net importer of power. Cleco doesn't have enough generation to serve its own base. So they're constantly bringing power in here. So for people to say this is a transmission constrained area, I don't know what that means, because we have plenty of transmission to get power from other places into here. Again, because Cleco imports more power than it generates. They don't have, even after they're done building Rotomaker 3, they're going to have to keep bringing more power in here. So if they're already bringing power in here, it doesn't make a difference if it's Cleco bringing it in or a third party that you would hire besides Cleco to bring it in. There may be a fee that you have to pay Cleco, but Cleco charges you a transmission fee also. Now, I don't know all the details of those fees, but I would like to be able to see what RW Beck is basing their approach on, because ideally, you could go out and bid Cleco against a third party and see and get a better deal. And that competition might get you a better deal. I mean, on paper, it looks like a good deal, $60 million over 13 years. But again, we don't know what those assumptions are underlying the $60 million. And then you don't know what a competitor could do for you. And I realize that Cleco is not saying, they're not admitting any fault, that they're not saying they committed fraud. But if they're willing to make the deal, that obviously means there is some smoke where there's fire. And if they have taken advantage of the city before, I will argue they will take advantage of the city again. So I would seriously consider doing business with somebody who's taken advantage of you before. And the best way to do that is to go out and get bids or seek other people. There are other people. Cleco themselves doesn't just do their resource coordination. I mean, Cleco Power has its own resource coordination desk. But Cleco has run plants where they've hired third parties like a Calpine or a One Oak to come in and do the resource coordination for that plant. So, or dispatching for that plant. So there are other parties out there besides Cleco that can do this. And because of the open access transmission tariff, you're not bound to using Cleco as a provider. That's what the law was intended for, is intended to let you, to open up the lines. I mean, Cleco may own the lines, but just like pipelines, the natural gas pipeline carrier doesn't, they may own the pipeline, but they can't just force their own gas through there.
Point well made. We do have time, and I think it's important that we hear all the information. Again, we're not going to try to address the specifics. I will tell you the devil's in the detail. There's a whole lot of detail in the R.W. Beck report that would address some of the concerns that you just expressed. One thing that I was very, very insistent on being in this agreement was that we have access. And with that access, you have the ability, meaning all folks that are going to be checking on the figures to make sure we're getting billed for what we use, that we have the ability to interpret that. Mr. Marcotte just eloquently expressed, and I hope that we've shared it with the media again. The document that we're going to have now before us is very, very easily readable, and we'll be able to show what they're actually charged. Now, you're talking about in the past. We will share those details with you, and your question will be addressed very specifically, and if it's not addressed to your satisfaction, we'll afford you the opportunity to get with whoever you'd like to get to.
You will share the RW Beck report with the
Yeah.
On behalf of the administration, in answer to Mr. LaCour's question, we will provide the backup documentation. I want to tell the public that his question, although very technical, is dead on.
Right.
This is something that somebody in the business which Mr. LaCour would know, and it's a very legitimate question. The OATT, when you saw that slide, is about this access that everyone has. And you heard Mr. Marcotte address it in terms of the cost to bring our infrastructure up. In other words, while we're allowed to use the lines, there are other costs that can come in. R.W. Beck did consider that, Mr. Lawson. We charged them with that because we, of course, wanted to know early on, as this council charged us to find out what other ways can we get out of it. We, of course, thought about the allegations, the seriousness of those allegations, and that if you believe that, then you would have an obligation to go out and look. Mr. LaCour has asked a very cogent question, and it's one that deserves a very succinct and direct answer from the material, and it will be provided. We will consider that one of the questions that the administration will immediately provide back up to, place into the public record, as well as discuss more of this with Mr. LaCour so that he can feel better than any other citizen. Thank you so much.
And I forgot to mention too, we're going to have an official document of the transcript of this meeting. It's going to be done by a court reporter in detail. So all your questions will be responded to in detail and transcribed by the court reporter. Madam Clerk, do you have any other questions? Anyone writing in? Okay. Anything else?
Can someone who did not sign ask a question?
Normally not, but I would afford that opportunity since it's a public hearing.
Well, thank you. I was hesitant to sign without seeing the presentation because I did not know what
I
was
understand
comment, and I didn't want my comments to be vain. I too, like the other gentleman, was concerned because I saw what benefits.
For the record, if you'd state your name.
I'm sorry. I am Sybil Holt, a resident of the Lower Third area. I saw the presentation where the savings were to the city, but there was obviously no data in what that would mean to citizens, from maybe the lowest to the highest for regular citizens and or businesses. The other thing, like the gentleman, even though we were told that this agreement, based on our consultant's recommendation, would be the best for us, I have to assume that they did check to see what other companies could provide anytime they could make that assessment. But that information was not made available, and I'm assuming it will be made available to you all. The third thing, and at some point in time you would make it available to the public. The third thing was, I kind of noted that if we don't accept this, then no other issue is worthwhile being discussed. I don't know what other issues are, but the mere fact that we've had to pay consultants, we had to pay attorney fees, whether we accept this or not, some negotiations need to be done with Cleco about getting the city's money back in that area, as well as what we spent, what we've taken from consumers. And to say if we don't accept this, that issue is mute, null and void. I think the city is missing the ball, right on target. We need to get our money back, and the city does too.
I think, just to point out, Mr. Marcotte, this whole answer to I think Mr. Marcotte was merely pointing out that if you don't accept this, the presentation is moot in that you would litigate and you would achieve the value for the citizens through that. So it was not meant, and we apologize if it sounded that way, it was not meant to suggest otherwise. It was meant to say, apart from this agreement, if this is what they will agree as an amicable resolution, if the council should choose to agree with Cleco on that would be how you achieved an amicable resolution, Ms. Holt. But if you didn't do that, obviously the city has no intention of not moving forward in any other matter in which it can.
That was your intent, Mr. Marcotte.
Absolutely, Mr. Lawson. I think it's important to address that our current arrangement with Cleco expires in March of 2010. Beck basically looked at 3 generic possibilities: repowering DG Hunter, finding another provider, as Mr. LaCour had mentioned, or a possible continued relationship with Cleco. Obviously, completely repowering DG Hunter was estimated around $200 million and did not reduce our dependence on natural gas. And we think that's the biggest opportunity that we have, is to reduce that dependence on natural gas. The second, if you look at other third parties, wherever those third parties might be, it's not necessarily that there are not enough transmission assets coming into the city of Alexandria. There are. But it's where does that power come from? It could come from Oklahoma, where our swap of power does. It could come from Arkansas. It could come from Tennessee. And whose lines are you crossing along the way? And whatever effect you have on those lines, you have to mitigate. Those are where the cost prohibitive items arise. Is not in the general area of the city, but in some far-flung place that we don't know where it is right now.
I want to say, for the benefit of the public that's viewing Channel 4 and those in the room, there will be occasionally scroll through this public hearing an email address that if you care to write in an email question, or email a question in, you'll be afforded that opportunity. Our clerk will be checking it regularly and forwarding it to our legal counsel. So just because you weren't able to make this meeting doesn't mean you won't be able to participate. And again, we're going to meet on the 31st and 30th, on the 30th of December as a follow-up to this meeting. Additional questions? Ms. Sandra Bright, approach the mic. Please approach it. This will be an official meeting, and we want Sandra Bright and her Christmas red address. That's a Delta Christmas.
All right, before I get started, at the next meeting, are we going to have to sign up? If we are, we let the public know ahead of time?
Well, normally you have to sign up at all the meetings, but I think this is important enough that we will relax the rules. But this is the only meeting, and probably the next meeting, that you won't have to sign up.
Okay, my question is, when Mr. Marcotte was giving the presentation about the DG Hunter station, and the asset that he was talking about was like $29 million. And I guess I need clarification. The $29 million estimate as this asset, is this tangible or just on paper? And the reason why I'm saying this, because if the city is going to sell this asset for $29 million, okay, what is this $29 million going to be utilized? Back into the general fund, or if it's going to be used for our utility, help these people that have these high utility bills and can't afford to pay them? So that was my question.
I think he's going to address one of your questions and clarify. Go ahead, Mr. Marcotte.
Ms. Bright, the $29 million is not, we would still absolutely own DG Hunter. We're not selling the physical asset itself. At the end of the contract term, we would still retain complete ownership of it. What we're selling is the right to use it. And for regulatory purposes, I talked about the capacity margins. Cleco would have rights to the output of those units, and they could count the output on those units in their capacity margins for their regulatory purposes. And so that's the value that we gain from it. As far as the allocation of those funds, should that capacity payment be elected, I think that's to be delayed, to be discussed later at a separate hearing.
Correct. Next question. I'd like to welcome Mr. Theodore Fontaine, Jr., District D, Rapides Parish Police Bureau, to the meeting. Any questions, comments from the administration? Let me thank Mr. Marcotte. Very good job. Thank you, Mr. President. It took a lot of work to go into that. I'd like to commend him, but not give him the credit for doing the PowerPoint presentation, because he's maybe a good engineer, but I don't know if you're that good with the bullets and everything. Whoever's involved with it, I think it was as easy as possible. I know Daniel was involved in Lamar. I want to thank Lamar for the work done, the entire administrative staff. I will forward my colleagues on the dais to ask any questions they'd like to ask at this point. If not, I'm going to let Mr. Guest on legal counsel and then close out with the mayor. He cares to have comment. Yes, sir.
As a member of the council, I appreciate your questions This is a very complex thing, and I asked a couple of years ago, I said, how long do I have to serve on the council to become as smart as all the engineers? I never got an answer, and they don't have all the answers either. We still don't have them. On the strength that if any of us are sick, we normally go to a doctor. We go to a doctor and then are guided by his diagnosis. If not, you might as well not go. We felt inadequate to really make a value judgment on some of this. Of course, it's been going on for years, and we're trying to preclude the continuation of any abuses or deja vu. And therefore, we had Beck, we had this attorney from Washington who is considered to be #1 in the country. They made extensive evaluations. We spent lots of money to get this information, which was reduced in capital form tonight. But don't treat it lightly. This involved thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours of time, and a rather comprehensive evaluation analysis, trying to cover up, wrong word, trying to evaluate the things that happened.
Everything was going well until then.
I promise, it's Christmas time, no profanity. Have faith in these people. They're great, great doctors, great, great people. Thank you.
Anyone else on the council?